This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 17th chapter. Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain all by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." This is the gospel of the Lord, and you may be seated. So I've had an interesting journey over the last 24 hours. I've been doing a lot of thinking and have had some epiphanies along the way. My first epiphany is I'm getting older. I'm going to be turning 39 next month, March 22nd. I know, that's shocking, the big 39. And the reason I'm feeling older is I was eating cereal last night. And I was eating oatmeal squares. It's kind of a harder cereal, and I'm eating, and all of a sudden I feel kind of a hard chunk in my mouth. Here I chipped a tooth on cereal. Who chips a tooth on cereal? So me, apparently. So I've got to go to the dentist this week and get that repaired. But anyway, it happened. So that was my first epiphany. But then my second epiphany has to do with the idea of guiding principles. Just yesterday morning, I was meeting with a couple of people and talking about the importance of guiding principles for an organization, for a congregation, for a corporation, guiding principles. And I have a slide up on the screen. Didn't turn out the greatest there, but you can see a compass there. And guiding principles help orient us and guide us, and they help get people moving in the right direction. Principles or ideas that we can all get behind. And then I thought about us in terms of a church, of a congregation. What are our guiding principles as a church? And obviously, our number one guiding principle as a church is we do everything because of Jesus and the gospel. We do everything to reach out with the good news of the gospel. That is our foundation as a church, our foundational guiding principle. We do it for the sake of the gospel. We reach out with the good news to a world that is hurting and is dark. But what do we build? What do we build on top of that foundation? What are our guiding principles as a church? And as I was thinking about all of that, I turned on the TV, and guess what? The Cubs were playing. It's their very first game. And they were interviewing Joe Madden about his guiding principles for the Cubs. Last year, he came up with a number of different guiding principles to help orient his team and move forward. And they must have worked, because did you know that the Cubs won the World Series last year? 2016. So clearly it was a good thing. And so their manager, Joe Madden, talks about the importance of these guiding principles. And you can go to the next slide there. Here's an example of one of them. He talks about the importance of do simple better, which I absolutely love. I firmly believe that the simplest way is usually the best way. And so that's one of his guiding principles for his team. Do simple better. In fact, I have a t-shirt that says, "Do simple better," and that's been a staff mantra as well. Do simple better. All right, the next one there, Chris. This one's kind of hard to see, but number one there, another one was embrace the target. This was from last year as they were beginning their spring training process. He said, embrace the target. And what that meant is the Cubs, believe it or not, were favored to do very well last year. And by the way, they won the World Series 2016. They were predicted to do very well. And so there was kind of a target on them. And other teams were going to take them out. And Joe Madden said, embrace that. It's okay. Embrace the target. And clearly it worked because they did win the World Series, in case I haven't mentioned that. All right, the next one. There's Joe Madden right there. The next one, he talks about never permit the pressure to exceed the pleasure. Never permit the pressure to exceed the pleasure. So make sure to go out and have fun. That this is baseball, after all. Have fun in what you're doing. Don't let the pressure exceed the pleasure. And this year, when they were interviewing him, he's come up with some new guiding principles for the team. The number one thing he said is, be uncomfortable. Be uncomfortable. You don't want to rest on your laurels. You know, they did win the World Series in 2016. Don't get comfortable. Don't rest on that. Be uncomfortable. Then the next thing he talked about, another guiding principle, remember the heartbeat, which I think is a really good one. Remember that you are humans. In baseball and in so many different parts of life, it's come down to numbers. People are numbers. And in baseball, they do all sorts of statistics to figure out who to play where and all of those different things. He says, remember the heartbeat. Remember you are humans, that is an important part of baseball. Then the last thing he talked about was authenticity, the importance of being authentic. Be who you are. Don't try to be somebody that you're not. Be authentic. And I thought these were just great guiding principles, and thinking about those in terms of the church and in terms of our local congregation here at Christ the King. What are our guiding principles, building on top of the foundation of the gospel, our central guiding principle? Then I was thinking about other areas of my life where I have, where guiding principles have been important in my life. And I was thinking about working on the ambulance service. And I think I've got a picture here. Is that the next one? I am right below the A in St. James right there. We had two ambulances. This is the newer ambulance. And I look at that and I get excited because I got to drive it really fast down the road. So that's our ambulance squad. And I trained to be an EMT way back in 1998. And one of my instructors said, the number one guiding principle that you need whenever you come on scene is to say this, not my emergency. This is not my emergency. And that guiding principle was to help calm yourself down as you come on scene. This is not my emergency. I am here to facilitate and to help, but I'm not here to get wrapped up in this. I'm here to help and to assist. And I remembered that, and every time I would come on scene, whether it was an accident or someone was having a heart attack, whatever it was, I would say that before I walked through the door, not my emergency, not my emergency. And that helped to orient me. It was a very important guiding principle for me. So I'm thinking about all of that, and then looking at our gospel text. And I started to look at our gospel in a new way and notice something in this gospel text that I hadn't seen before. This is a really famous text. It's the story of the Transfiguration. And in this story, Jesus is along with Peter and James his brother John, and they go up this high mountain. They're on this mountain trek, you might say. And so they're going up this mountain, and just imagine yourself walking with them, being in that group. Close your eyes if you need to. What would that be like? You're walking with all of these people, these important figures of our faith. And they may have been having simple, mundane conversations about life, about their ministry, about their work. They're walking along, and then all of a sudden, Jesus is transfigured. He is transformed, and he starts to shine like the sun. And that must have been extremely bright, just this bright, bright vision, shining as bright as the sun. And the sun is really bright. Have you ever kind of looked at the sun and then you look away and you can kind of see a shadow of the sun? You kind of see a circle of the sun. The sun is really bright. So Jesus was just shining really, really brightly. And his clothes became dazzling white. And then, if that's not enough, Moses and Elijah suddenly appear, these great heroes of the faith, and they're talking with Jesus. And then Peter starts to talk. I think of an ambulance friend that I had. They would start to talk whenever they would get nervous. We would be on scene and they'd just start talking about random things. Do you know that type of person, kind of that talker person? They start talking when they get nervous. That's what Peter was in this story. He just starts talking in the midst of all of this. Peter says to Jesus, with all of this going on, and he probably was shouting it maybe, he says, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I'm going to make 3 dwellings." He doesn't know what else to do, so he just starts talking. "I'm going to build 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He wanted to hold on. He wanted to hold on to that moment, to this glorious moment, and be there. And while he's still talking, while he's still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadows them. And from the cloud, God speaks and says, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased." And then he says, listen to him. "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And this harkens back to his baptism when the Spirit of God descended and said, "This is my son, the beloved." In a way, this is almost like Jesus' confirmation. He's affirming his baptism as he moves forward in his ministry. Listen to him. And when the disciples heard this, they suddenly fall to the ground. Just imagine what that would have been like, this booming voice, and they fall to the ground, and they were overcome with fear, and maybe we could even say awe at this moment, overcome with fear and awe. And then Jesus comes along, touches them, and says, "Get up and do not be afraid. Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. And as they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, I think this is interesting, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." So I looked at this text in light of that conversation and in light of watching the Cubs game, thinking of my ambulance work, thinking of this whole idea of guiding principles. And all of a sudden, something appeared to me in the text. Before I got so caught up in the transfiguration, just how glorious that was, that I missed some of the things that were going on around the text. And then I suddenly realized there are a set of guiding principles that have emerged from the text that the disciples could use as they continue in their ministry. Jesus was working to orient them and to get them moving in the same direction. And here are the guiding principles that come out of this text. And I also read a commentary by David Lose. He's a president of a seminary out east, and he talks about this as well in his commentary. The first guiding principle that emerges out of this text is this whole notion of listening. God says, "Listen to him. This is my son, the beloved." So the importance of listening to God in our life, listening to where God is moving us, where God is orienting us in life. And that can be a really hard thing to do, to slow down and listen, because we, like Peter, we spend a lot of time talking, that sometimes we forget to just sit and listen to where God might be guiding us as a congregation, where God might be guiding us in our own individual lives as well. I know I have a hard time with this one, just simply listening to God. And that's been a goal of mine in this new year, a guiding principle for me to listen to God. And so I've been meeting with a spiritual director to help me with that process of listening And it's somebody that I can visit with, talk about life, and we spend time in prayer as well. And one tool that he's given me to help listen to God is something that was developed many hundreds of years ago, and it's called the Examen. This was developed by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who helped to found the Jesuit order in the Catholic tradition. And this is the Examen. It's a 5-step process. The Examen first starts off by asking God for light, to be able to see the world with God's eyes. And the second thing is to give thanks for all of the things in your life, the blessings in your life, to approach life with a sense of gratitude. The third thing then is to review the day, to review how your day went, where you were, what you were thinking, what you were doing. And then the next thing is to talk about your shortcomings. Where did you sin on that particular day, and to ask for forgiveness for those things. And then to look forward to the day, to the next day, the day to come. And I've been doing that each night, and that's been a really helpful thing, to listen to God in my own life, where God is guiding and directing me. So that's the first guiding principle that emerges from our text. Listen to God in our lives. And the second one is get up. Get up is the next one. And another way that you can talk about this is to be raised. In fact, the same Greek word that's used here that references get up is also used in Matthew 28:6 when the angel appears when they're at the tomb. And this actually starts in verse 3. His appearance was like lightning and his clothing white as snow. This is the angel descending down to the tomb, to the women that were there. For fear of them, the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised." So that same Greek word that is used here, "he has been raised," is the same one that Jesus uses in our text for today, get up. So there's sort of this idea of being raised to new life, of resurrection in this as well. So the second guiding principle is to get up and to be raised, to be renewed. You might even say to be transfigured. So we keep moving in life. We keep moving forward. We get up when we're knocked down by life. We keep at it. We're committed. We are faithful. So that's the second guiding principle. When life knocks you down, get up. Be raised. Be resurrected. Be renewed. And the last one is do not fear. Get up, and then he says, do not be afraid. And we live in a world where there are a lot of things to be afraid of, and the world wants us to be afraid. But we move forward in this world, this scary world, with courage, because we know that God always walks with us. This does not mean that bad things will not happen in our life, but it does mean that we don't have to be afraid, because God is always walking with us. So whatever we face in life, do not be afraid, because God is with us. God is working to bring new life in our world. This is indeed good news. So those are some guiding principles that emerged from this text that really stood out to me. And I think these are important things to keep in mind in the midst of this anxious world that we're living in the midst of the transition that's going on here in our congregation at Christ the King. The importance of listening to God, the importance of knowing that we are raised, that God is working to bring new life to our lives, new life to our congregation. And we don't have to be afraid, because God is with us in all things. Now, you wouldn't believe it today, but soon, all around us, God will work to transform and transfigure the beautiful land that we live on. It's quite white out right now with the snow that we've gotten. But soon all of that snow will be melted, and the birds will return, and it'll get warm out again, and the brown grass will turn green again. And I'm really looking forward to the lakes melting so we can go out fishing again. God is always working to transfigure our lives, to renew our lives. And we know that because look what God did to the cross. The cross was once a symbol of death, and God renewed it and transformed it because of the work that Jesus did, that he was raised on the third day, that he was raised up, that he was resurrected. God transfigured and transformed the cross from a symbol of death into a symbol of life. And God is working to transform our own lives and to bring new life to where there is death. This is good news. So let's keep following those guiding principles as a way to pay attention to that, to keep listening to God, to know that God raises us up, and to know that we don't have to be afraid. God is working to bring new life, to bring transfiguration. This is good news. Amen.